time for the U.S. to get their heads kicked in. It's time to finish off the U.S. once and for all. I say, Mr. President Bush, I say, the United States.
You are the best chess player in the world, without a doubt, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right? That's great.
This is the highest level.
What Ron Laver is to tennis, what Jack Nicklaus is to golf, that's what Bobby Fischer is to chess.
I mean, it seems to me in chess, you have to have the talent, but the guys who reach the top are the ones who keep at it. They have the character. They don't get distracted by other things in life until they got the title or whatever they wanted out of chess.
Bobby Fischer is the greatest American chess player who ever lived, and his rise was just as captivating as his fall.
On June the 22nd, unless arrangements fall apart, and in the stormy world of chess, anything can happen, Bobby Fischer of the United States will finally meet Boris Spassky of the Soviet Union for the chess championship of the world. At stake, immense prestige for the Russians, who jealously guard their reputation as the country of the chess masters. They've held the world title for 35 years. You think that Russians are pretty worried about you at this moment?
Oh, yeah, they have been ever since I started playing chess.
Even as a little boy?
That's right. I remember the first thing they ever wrote about me was, he's a talented player, and, they showed a game I played, and then they said, but all this publicity he's getting and all of this attention cannot fail to have a harmful effect on his personality development.
When I was 10, I made a wish. Never be invisible again.
Fischer was a child prodigy. He began playing when he was 6. A prodigy, but never the darling of the chess world.
From 1957 to 1967, age 14 to 24, Fischer competed in 8 U.S. championships and won every single one.
He just dominated American chess for a decade.
But over his run, he began causing more and more headaches for the organizers of these tournaments.
This is kind of a theme going forward of Fischer. He's kind of picky, or whatever the word would be, about Controlling, yeah. And a little bit of, if things don't go his way, he's not afraid to say, I'm just not going to play.
And, you read a lot of articles about Bobby saying he's kind of temperamental and demanding, and he's not. I met him this afternoon, the place he designated, on top of the Y. In the sign Hollywood that's up in the Hollywood Hills. We met on top of that Y in Hollywood, but...
Well, if you win 10 straight.
Yeah, you can kind of do whatever you want.
Look, heard they talking about me, I ain't even know. Heard a person had a problem with me, I ain't even know.
It says here, are all chess masters egomaniacs?
Now, when you used to walk out of matches, what were the reasons for that? You used to talk
first
about your
of all,
terrible temper.
First of all, I only dropped out of 2 matches in my whole life. And I just looked it up the record. I played in about 60 matches my whole life, so it's been a little exaggerated. But I was complaining about the lights. The spectators were bothering me, a lot of noise. They were using all kind of horrible lighting, chandelier-type lighting, when actually you need really soft lighting for it. This is a serious business, 5 hours. Working with your eyes,
Why, because of the glare, or the light shining into your eyes?
Yeah, the light shining into your eyes.
I mean, he seems kind of like a baby, a little bit, like, he has to have all his demands met.
In 1962, in the high-profile Candidates Tournament, Fischer placed 4th out of 8. Afterwards, in a Sports Illustrated article, he accused the Soviets of cheating.
And you've made some rather strong charges against them a couple of times involving...
cheating.
Cheating, I think, is the word that I was looking for. What was the evidence of that?
Well, they came. One tournament I played in back in '62. That was a specific one I was talking about. They prearranged about a dozen games among themselves to eliminate me.
So it's these big tournaments. There'd be a bunch of Soviet players. He thought that 3 of the 5 of them were kind of conspiring. They'd prearranged to try to draw their games against each other. So, like, if you sacrifice all your pieces, you can get to a position where it's a draw real quick without having to think and do too much. So these big tournaments where the mental ability is
I've heard they've grandmasters burn like 8,000 calories a day.
Right.
Fischer's accusations are generally thought to be correct, that the Soviets were intentionally drawing their matches in order to conserve energy. This created an unfair advantage against Bobby.
Fischer stated he would never participate in another one of these candidates tournaments since the format combined with the collusion made it impossible for a non-Soviet player to win. So following this, the FIDE, but it's the governing body of chess, they voted to implement a radical reform to the playoff system, replacing the candidates tournament with the format of one-on-one knockout matches. Kind of the scenario where you're playing each other. It's like it's just head-to-head.
The following year, in the 1963-64 U.S. Championship, Fischer would achieve his second ever perfect score.
But this time, the first perfect score was it wasn't against like the top players. This was the top players in the country. He had a perfect score, which brought him one of about 10 perfect scores in high-level chess tournaments ever. David Hooper and Kenneth Wield, whoever these guys are, called it the most remarkable achievement of this kind.
This brought Bobby heightened fame. A profile in Life magazine, and Sports Illustrated diagrammed all of his winning games in an article called The Amazing Victory Streak of Bobby Fischer.
And so it's kind of putting chess on the map, at least in the United States. Kind of groundbreaking for America. Only perfect score in the history of the tournament.
In 1964, as the U.S. champion, Fischer is eligible to participate in the Amsterdam Interzonal, which would enter him into the World Championship cycle. But he decides against participating and instead goes on a U.S. tour, playing simultaneous exhibitions and promoting his book.
He declined an invitation to play for the U.S. in the 1964 Olympiad in Tel Aviv. So he took a little bit of a break there.
In 1966, Fischer accepted an invitation to the Piatigorsky Cup in Santa Monica. He started the tournament terribly, before charging back and narrowly losing the championship to a Soviet named Boris Spassky by half a point.
So after that loss to Boris Spassky, he, at the age of 23, would go on to win every match or tournament he competed for the rest of his life. Or completed.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was to Spassky there. That was the last loss.
Just decided to stop losing.
I guess.
Didn't like how it felt.
I do it by myself. Yeah, I could do it all. And if you got it, I'll be laughing at you when you
In 1967, he competed in the Interzonal tournament in Tunisia.
He had 8.5 points in the first 10 games and was leading the field. He observed the Worldwide Church of God's Seventh-day Sabbath, which was honored by the organizers, but it deprived him of several days of rest, which he felt like he needed, leading to a scheduling dispute. And he ended up forfeiting 2 games in protest and withdrawing, and eliminated himself again from the World Championship cycle. So he wins 2 more tournaments, and he quits playing again for 18 months, published another book, My 60 Memorable Games, pretty popular book.
In 1970, Bobby finally decides to commit himself towards becoming world champion, something he's repeatedly withdrawn himself from in the past. This would kick off an unprecedented run of domination.
From 1970 to 71, he just dominated. One tournament, he beat this Soviet grandmaster who afterwards, the guy Taimanov, asked Fischer how he came up with the move. Fischer replied, the idea was not his. He had come across it in the monograph by the Soviet master Alexander Nikitin in a footnote.
As a teenager, Bobby had taught himself several other foreign languages as a way to be able to study all the chess material that existed in the world.
Taimanov said, it is staggering that I, an expert on the Sicilian, should have missed this theoretically significant idea by my compatriot, while Fischer had uncovered it in a book in a foreign language.
Wow.
So, on a footnote.
Right.
He ended up beating that guy by a score of 6-0.
Taimanov was not only an elite chess grandmaster, he was also a high-level concert pianist. After the loss, he remarked, well, at least I still have my music.
He said, well, I still have my music, which unfortunately he didn't, because afterwards he was thrown out of the USSR team and forbidden to travel for 2 years, banned from writing articles, and deprived of his monthly stipend, and the authorities prohibited him from performing on the concert platform. The crushing loss virtually ended Taimanov's chess career.
Just because of the loss?
Yeah, because he got beat so bad.
Disgrace.
Disgrace to the mother country.
Never perform again.
Unfortunately for Tamenov, his punishment didn't stop there. He wasn't just banned from performing as a pianist. He was also publicly humiliated, as was common practice for national embarrassments in the USSR. Following the devastating loss to Fischer, his body was tranquilized and paraded around Moscow with the words "Bespanny Karlik," meaning impotent elf, written across his chest. Newspapers described Tamenov's nearly naked body as, quote, disturbing, both of stature and of proportion. One paper referred to him as the pear man, as his body unmistakably resembled the shape of a pear. Following the traditional 3 days of parading, he was then soaked from the neck down in a permanent blue dye made of peacock blood and a rare Siberian clay. The reasoning being, since he caused Russians to be sad, or blue, by the way of his loss, he would now spend the rest of his days as a blue man. Tamenov tried to make the most of his life after this loss, but after many failed auditions to the Blue Man Group, he died in obscurity. Actually, I was just kidding. I made all that parading stuff up. I suppose I was just trying to have a little fun. Truth of the matter is, this is a very demanding work environment I've been put in here as staff historian for 55 folks. It's just long hours of nothing but poring over various history books and knowledge sources and whatnot, and it can get to you. So anyways, next, Bobby was scheduled to face the Danish Grandmaster, Bent Larsen. Boris Spassky predicted a tight struggle.
Spassky was the guy he lost to earlier. He said Larsen's a little stronger in spirit, and before the match, Botvinnik told the Soviet television audience, "It's hard to say how their match will end, but it's clear that such an easy victory as in Vancouver against Tamenov will not be given to Fischer. I think Larsen has unpleasant surprises in store for Fischer. All the more since having dealt with Tamenov thus, Fischer will want to do just the same to Larsen, and this is impossible." And it was not impossible because he beat him by the identical score of 6-0.
Robert Byrne, the man who Fischer played in The Game of the Century with, said, "To a certain extent, I could grasp the Tamenov match as kind of a curiosity, almost a freak, a strange chess occurrence that would never occur again. But now I'm at a loss for anything, whatever to say. So it was out of the question for me to explain how Bobby, how anyone could win 6 games in a row from such a genius of the game as Bent Larsen."
He recently annihilated 2 chess masters in a row. You probably read about it in the papers in the World Championship tournament. He beat them both 6-0, which is 6 times. He beat each of them 6 times to 0. Which is unheard of. Most chess games end in a draw in big-time chess. Because a man can usually get in a position, as I understand it, where he doesn't have to lose, he can make it a draw.
The biographers David Edmonds and John Idenau said, faced with Fischer's extraordinary coolness, his opponent's assurance would begin to disintegrate. A Fischer move, which at first glance would look weak, would be reassessed. It must have a deep master plan behind it, undetectable by mere mortals. And more often than not, they were right. It did.
Well, because some of the guys would say, like, it just doesn't make sense. Well, people would be like, oh, so-and-so played good until he played Fischer, and then he played, he just didn't play very good that day or whatever. And Fischer said something along the lines of, "It's funny how no one seems to play very good when they play against me."
It's funny because they say, I believe in a big tournament like this, you get 3 days off for illness. And a man said, Fischer's opponents always have a way of becoming ill. What is that? What do you do to them?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of pressure in these matches, and day after day, playing 5 hours, and if it's adjourned, the next day, 6 hours, but you've been up all night studying the adjourned position. And
the U.S. Grandmaster Robert Byrne labeled the phenomenon Fischer fear. The Grandmasters would wilt, their suits would crumple, sweat would glisten on their brows, panic would overwhelm their nervous system, errors would creep in, calculations would go awry. There was talk among Grandmasters that Fischer had hypnotized his opponents, that he undermined their intellectual powers with dark, mystic, insidious force.
Whoa. Really in their head.
Really in their head, yeah.
Right. I mean, the concentration, you're sitting there for hour after hour, and if you have when you get a little older, you have these momentary mental lapses, or you just weaken, you can't give it all you've got. That's all. It just takes this much, just to miscalculate one little thing in your mind, you know. And
what's the peak period? For example, when do you think you'll reach your peak in terms of age?
well, I'm different. I mean, I intend to keep playing for a long time. But
He was 6 years old, he took up chess. His mom was a single mom, and he just played by himself because he didn't have anyone to play with. So his mom wanted to have an ad ran in the paper to try to find some kid to go play with poor little Bobby. She thought he was spending too much time alone, didn't really quite understand what he's doing. So the paper gets whatever the message that the mom sent in. It's like, well, we're not going to run an ad for someone to play chess with your 6-year-old, but what they did do is forward it to a guy named Herman Helms, who was at the time the dean of American chess. At that time, so they were called simultaneous exhibitions. It's where one really good player, like a master or grandmaster, whatever, is playing multiple people. And so he's walking around, like he'll make a move on this board, walk to the next board and make a move. And then the challenger, there could be 20 challengers or 3 or however many they're playing. So the guy's playing multiple different games at a time. This former Scottish champion, his name is Master Max Parvey. He was playing a simultaneous exhibition, and they had told Fischer's mom about this when they got the letter. And so Fischer went and played, and he lost to Parvey, but he played him tough. And was just a 6-year-old kid.
Fischer loses, but he plays Parvey tough at this simultaneous exhibition. So much so that the president of the Brooklyn Chess Club took notice of his talent and introduced him to the club.
That's when he was 6.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he lost to the guy, but he played him evidently well enough to impress this president. And all he'd done is played by himself.
Okay.
So like just kind of, he would move a piece and walk to the other side of the board and move a piece. So then July of 1956 is when he won the U.S. Junior Chess Championship in Philadelphia. He scored 8.5 out of 10 to become the youngest ever junior champion at age 13, which is a record that still stands.
Later that same year, he would play the international master Donald Byrne in a match in New York City. This match would come to be dubbed the game of the century.
And Fischer in that game sacrificed his queen. This guy Hans Kamak is some international master. He's the one who called it the game of the century originally. He wrote, "The following game, a stunning masterpiece of combination play performed by a boy of 13 against a formidable opponent, matches the finest on record in the history of chess prodigies."
At 15, Bobby becomes the youngest grandmaster in history.
At 16, he dropped out of high school because he's a grandmaster in chess. What are you going to learn in your junior year of high school? So yeah, he said he dropped out of school. He said, you don't learn anything in school. And he began teaching himself several other foreign languages so that he could read foreign chess periodicals.
Whoa.
So he's like, way submerged in chess. That's basically all he's doing.
That same year, at age 16, his mom leaves him to go to medical school.
His mom, her name was Regina. Like I said, she was a single mom. She left basically around this time to go to medical school. So one thing that's interesting is she had some communist sympathies. It sounded like Bobby hated the USSR. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit, but I don't know. They said maybe part of that was because his mom was kind of a Soviet sympathizer a little bit, and I think he was a little bit upset that she left. She said when she left, I know it sounds wrong to, and this is not a direct quote, but I know it's wrong to leave a 16-year-old boy, but he'll be way happier without me because all he's doing is just playing chess all the time. So at this time, Fischer had gained a far higher rating than any player in history up to that time. He had the rating of 2785, which was 125 points above Spassky, who is the world number 2.
Is there any way, Bobby, that you can judge from reading the achievements of past chess masters, whether you think you're the greatest chess player that ever walked the earth?
We've got a rating system, and according to the present rating system, I have the highest rating of any player that's ever lived. They of course, it's hard to rate the players that are from the past that are dead now. Mm-hmm.
But you have the records.
They go back, they say my record against Botvinnik, then Botvinnik's record against Hervé, and then Hervé's record against so-and-so, and they go all the way back, and of according to the system, I have the highest rating, and the system is accepted by the International Chess Organization.
Highest rating ever, or highest?
Ever, yeah.
This remarkable high rating gained him even more recognition, put him on the cover of Life magazine, and allowed him to challenge world champion Boris Spassky. Up to this point, Bobby had never beaten Spassky. He had 0 wins, 3 losses, and 2 ties.
What would it do to your ego if, by some terrible chance, you were beaten in this match?
Well,
You obviously haven't thought about the possibility.
I try not to think about it too much. I'd realize it was a fluke, and that's it.
You played Spassky. He's beaten you, but you've never beaten him.
Yeah, well, we've only played a few games. So we were just the other day looking through that his games from the Moscow event, that Alekhine tournament, and they were atrocious games. He was really he was lost in half the games in that tournament. Really bad games on his part.
Why would that happen to a man who, after all, is the champion of the world?
Well, the champion of the world. First of all, I didn't compete, so he's not really much of a champion. But he's the best they've got. That's a big deal.
Unsurprisingly, Fischer's stubbornness about tournament conditions would again become an issue in planning the match.
Of the possible cities, his first choice was Belgrade, Yugoslavia, and Spassky wanted, however you say that, Iceland. Reykjavik?
Oh, yeah, I know what you're saying.
Reykjavik. For a time, it appeared the dispute would be resolved by splitting the match kind of between the two locations, but that fell through. Fischer refused to appear in Iceland until they upped their purse. Some guy donated $125,000 more to bring the prize up to $250,000, which in today's money is $1.8 million.
So it was settled. Fischer would play Spassky in
Reykjavik
in the summer of 1972. This would be the first chess match to receive an American broadcast in prime time. This match wasn't just about chess. This was the height of the Cold War. When Bobby was on the fence about attending, Henry Kissinger gave him a call, urging him to go and win it not just for himself, but for America. So with the world watching, they began. But it was a miserable start for Fischer.
So he lost the first 2 games. The first he played some risky end game. The second he forfeited because he refused to play the game in some playing condition dispute. So he's basically throwing away a world championship game.
Now, what about the cameras over there, Bob? Now, you hear all this about you had agreed that they could film this, and then you kept changing that the cameraman must be in Vladivostok someplace, or was that what was the real story?
I was more disappointed than anybody that this thing wasn't televised, because a lot of publicity and there was a lot of money involved, and I wanted the people to see me in action. Let's face it. But they had these characters there who, instead of having some kind of videotape films that didn't make any noise, was just nobody around to operate them, just sort of stationless, and I just had guys there with film cameras that were worrying, and they were all around me, just making a racket, a nuisance.
Too much noise.
Too much noise, and visually could see them moving around.
Bobby likely would have forfeited the entire match. However, Boris Spassky didn't want to win by default, so he agreed to his demands.
What it was, I think, was he wanted to get away from the media or something, so they moved the game to a back room, away from any cameras, who, for whatever reason, it upset Bobby.
And it hasn't been exactly the calmest chess championship in history. First, Bobby Fischer went into hiding and didn't show up because the money wasn't good enough. He refused to play in front of the cameras at one point, and then he claimed that there was a conspiracy against him. He demanded his own swimming pool and all kinds of things. Some people seem to think this is all a psychological game he's playing with Spassky.
Is that something that you consciously think might upset somebody, or is it something the way you feel when you get ready to play? You want everything to be right, or what?
Well, I want everything to be right. I didn't try to psych Spassky. There's no need to. I'm the best player. And he knew it. Everybody knew it.
See, that would psych me right there. I'd say, good, you win, Bob. I mean...
The match continued without incident after the initial hiccup. Fischer would go on to lose just one of the next 19 games, winning 7 and drawing 11. Bobby Fischer defeated Boris Spassky 12.5 to 8.5, and in so doing, became the 11th world chess champion.
And at the time, you can imagine in 72, the Cold War, like implications of it. Media back home loved it, of course. It was the match of the century, front page media coverage of the United States. And
Garry Kasparov, a 15-year world chess champion himself, would later say, Fischer fits ideologically into the context of the Cold War era. The lone American genius challenges the Soviet chess machine and defeats it. Fischer's sister put the win in a similar perspective.
She said, Bobby did all this in a country almost totally without a chess culture. It was as if an Eskimo had cleared a tennis court in the snow and gone on to win the world championship.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
So they had a Bobby Fischer Day for him in New York. A bunch of endorsements worth at least $5 million, $36 million today. Declined all of them for whatever reason. Sports Illustrated cover. So afterwards, the membership of the U.S. Chess Federation doubled in 72. So, you know, people back home wanted to play. The Fischer boom.
People have been calling me arrogant for many years, but lately they're not calling me arrogant. Why? Because now, you know, I've been winning all these matches and I'm doing what I've always said I was, you know. So I used to say I was the best player in the world. Everybody's arrogant, terrible, conceited person, you know. Right. But this is just an obvious fact.
The other thing about the Soviet guys is they were subsidized by the USSR, basically, and then, like I said, they basically kicked the one guy out of the country if they lost. You know, that's kind of how it was over there. But the Soviets had dominated chess for like the previous quarter century at least.
Why is it that the Russians dominate the chess world? What have they got?
Well, they're subsidized by the government, and all their players are professionals, so they keep at it. We have a lot of talented players in this country, but for one reason or another, they just kind of fade out. They lose interest because there's not that much incentive.
Well, in the Rocky, where he went over to Russia, those guys were playing chess in their little cabin.
Bigger cultural
game. Yeah, exactly, like football here.
How long now? Now, do you, like a fighter, I think a heavyweight fighter must fight at least once a year or maybe less than that to retain his championship. Now, how is it with chess players? Are you?
Well, I'm in a good position. You see, I don't have to play every 3 years for my title. I don't have to play for 3 years, and the reason it's that way is because the Russians had the title, and when they had it, they didn't want to play that often, so they got the system set up. They only had to play every 3 years, never expecting to lose it.
So then in 1975, he was scheduled to defend his title against Anatoly Karpov, this guy's name, who had emerged as his challenger. He laid out a proposal for the match. He wanted 3 things that were non-negotiable. One, he wanted the match to continue until one player wins 10 games, so no draws count. Because if a guy gets up, in Fischer's mind, if a guy gets up 2 games, then you can like try to play real conservatively and force a bunch of draws to carry yourself. Number 2, no limit to the total number of games played. So, you know, that plays like you got to get to 10. And number 3, in case of a 9-9 score, the champion retains the title. So like the Ryder Cup. Okay. But the prize fund is split evenly. So those were the 3 things he said were non-negotiable. The FIDE said, we're not going to agree to that, basically. They at first voted in favor of the 10-win thing, but they rejected the other 2. So Fischer sends a cable back to them and said, as I made clear in my telegram to the FIDE delegates, the match conditions I proposed were non-negotiable. Mr. Kramer informs me that the rules of the winner being the first player to win 10 games, draws not counting, and limited number of games, and if 9 wins to 9 matches drawn with champion regaining title and prize fund split equally were rejected by the FID delegates. By so doing, FID has decided against my participation in the 1975 World Chess Championship. Therefore, I resign my FID World Chess Championship title. Sincerely, Bobby Fischer. So the FIDE, they were like, oh, this is not good. So they held a special convention. They accepted that the match could be unlimited duration, but the 9-9 clause was again rejected, you know, because it gives an unfair advantage to Fischer, basically. So they set the deadline, April 1st, 1975, and for Fischer and Karpov to confirm their participation in the match, and they never received a reply from Fischer, so then Karpov officially became the world champion.
Whoa.
So then he kind of went off the grid after that. Yeah, after the 72 World Chess Championship, Fischer did not play a competitive game in public for 20 years.
Do you regret stopping? Do you regret not having defended your title against Anatoly Karpov in 1975?
No.
No regrets?
That I offered perfectly fair conditions. He refused to play me.
Yeah.
My conditions were absolutely fair. It's all lies.
Went off the grid. He's just kind of staying around different places. This is in 81. He's staying at the home of some grandmaster, and they're playing a bunch of speed chess. And the guy's name is Peter Biases, I don't know. But he was assessing Fischer's place. This is 9 years after he quit, basically. He said he was too good. There was no use in playing him. It wasn't interesting. I was getting beaten and it wasn't clear to me why. It wasn't like I made this mistake or that mistake. It was like I was being gradually outplayed from the start. He wasn't taking any time to think. The most depressing thing about it is I wasn't even getting out of the middle game to an end game. I don't ever remember an end game. He honestly believes there's no one for him to play, no one worthy of him. I played him and I can attest to that. I mean, like you and I could set up a chessboard right now and play, and you don't play a whole lot. I don't play that much. I could play most anyone, and so could you, because we don't.
Yeah.
And it would be kind of fun because you're not that good.
Right.
But
you make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah,
anything could happen.
Right. Right. But you can play almost whoever if you wanted to play chess. You know what I mean? Versus Fischer, it's like who's he going to play? There's 10 guys in the world that he can play for fun.
Yeah. He take out a bunch of pieces to start.
Yeah, it's like I won't play with a queen and rook or something. He never liked that computers were getting into chess.
Oh, sure.
So he was more like he appreciated brilliant player, not just chug and plug these computer calculations to run different opening strategies and stuff. And he invented Fischer Random. And it's a game where basically the pawn structure is all the same on the front row, but the back row, the pieces are all different, so you can't memorize. It's a new game, basically. An outcropping of the same game.
I don't like to delve too much into the old chess because I hate it so much. I feel by delving into it, I'm promoting it in some way. I don't want to promote this goddamn game. My only interest in the old chess, only one interest. To expose the prearrangement. People are living in a dream world. You are trying to find some little improvement on move, 18 or 20. It's ridiculous. It gets harder and harder and harder. You need more and more computers. You need more and more people working for you. Why? Chess is no good, and it hasn't been a good game objectively for 150 years since all this theory. It was a good game maybe 200 years ago.
But with that game, you can't have the computer or the book, which is interesting too, because he was looking at reading all those things and had found the one from that random footnote, so he also was a student of the game.
Yeah. He just got bored with it.
So you're saying that already when you became world champion, that already by then it was a bad game?
Yes, it was a bad game, but but on the other hand, it wasn't as bad as today. No comparison, but it was a bad game. But at the time, I was fired with ambition. I was hating it, but I didn't know it, you know what I mean? Because I was still trying to make it work, But then now I realized I was gradually hating it, all along.
Eventually, Bobby begins to run out of money. Then in 1992, he is coaxed out of his hiatus by an offer too good to refuse. It's an unofficial rematch against Boris Spassky with a $5 million purse. There's only one problem. The match is being held in Yugoslavia, which was under UN sanctions because of the wars they were involved in. So under the sanctions, no sport prize money could be accepted by US citizens. Once the US learns of Bobby's intent to play in the match, they issue a cease and desist and warn him against competing and potentially accepting the prize.
So this is my reply to their order not to defend my title here. That's my answer.
Fischer responds by spitting on the letter, and the match gets underway.
So this is in 1992. He goes back, he has a rematch with Spassky, builds the World Chess Championship, even though it was an unofficial rematch, and Fischer ended up winning 10-5. At that time, Spassky wasn't like the greatest player in the world
so much later.
But You know, he still obviously had some talent, so.
Fischer takes the $3.35 million winner's share and flees with U.S. Marshals now after him. He eventually settles in Japan and would take frequent trips to the Philippines.
After the rematch, he floated around a bunch of various countries, basically in obscurity. He was in the Philippines. Hours after 9/11, he got on some radio show and said, "I applaud the act." He also said, "This horrible behavior that the U.S. is committing all over the world, this just shows you that what goes around comes around even for the United States."
This is all wonderful news. It's time for the U.S. to get their heads kicked in. It's time to finish off the U.S. once and for all. I say, to President Bush, I say, the United States. The United States, the Jews. The Jews are criminal people. They mutilate their children. They're murderous, criminal, thieving, lying bastards. They made up the Holocaust as our word of truth to them.
He said, "The country will be taken over by the military. They'll close down all the synagogues, arrest all the Jews, execute hundreds of thousands of Jewish ringleaders." So he went a little bit off the walls, like in his later years. He lived in Japan for a spell, got arrested there.
After one of his trips, Fischer was arrested upon returning to Japan due to an invalid passport. The United States finally took action against Fischer and voided his passport before its expiration.
Totally illegal. This was not an arrest. It was a kidnapping because the charges that the Japanese charged me with are total nonsense.
Because of this, he would spend 9 months in a Japanese prison before eventually being granted asylum in Iceland, where he was still loved for helping put Reykjavik on the map back in 1972.
Was it a letdown after it was all over, Bobby? I mean, it was, well, there must have been a tremendous...
It was. I woke up the day after the thing was over, and I just felt different, like something had been taken out of me.
He said, I wanted to be a world champion. I've achieved it. Now I don't know what to do. And I think that is the crux of what happened afterwards.
Now, look, you defeated Boris Spassky now, and you're the champion chess player of the entire world. Now, what is there beyond that? How do you top that? Is it now the trick is to not the trick, the idea is to maintain the championship?
Yeah, this is the big problem. How do I top it?
In 1972, for all intensive purposes, Bobby Fischer reached the peak. Then he looked around and found himself alone, without equal. Being alone was nothing new. Only now, there was nowhere to go.
He has no advisors, no coaches, no manager. He doesn't really trust anyone's advice. In a sense, his most reliable friends are the pieces on the board. He lives alone, always in hotel rooms that seem barely larger than chessboards. The television set is his window on the world. His strategies, in life as in chess, are mysterious and his own. This summer, he will finally play Boris Spassky for the championship. And perhaps he'll prove what he has always said, that Bobby Fischer is the best chess player in the world. But win or lose, Bobby wants everyone to know he did it by himself.
You know, I always wanted to write some songs. I was telling Evans, Larry Evans, this was back in the 60s, I remember. I said, you know, I listen to all these songs, and I wish I could write that, but I try to write something, I try to think of something, and I just, nothing comes out. And he says, yeah, because you haven't lived. And I started thinking about it. He's right. This is true, you know.